I'd like to introduce Dr. Chuck Bainton, who is a member of the Disarmament Committee of Peace Action Wisconsin, and also a member of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War.
As far back as the 1940s, the Manhattan Project scientists understood that since there was no longer any uncertainty about whether atomic bombs would work, given enough of a scientific and industrial base, any country could build nuclear weapons. Many people saw how dangerous that was, and they said so in statements like the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. I want to quote one such statement by President Kennedy, who said, quote, "With all of the history of war and the human race's history, unfortunately, has been a good deal more war than peace. With nuclear weapons distributed all through the world and available and the strong reluctance of any people to accept defeat, I see the possibility in the 1970s of the President of the United States having to face a world in which 15 or 20 or 25 nations may have these weapons. I regard that as the greatest possible danger and hazard." What Kennedy could see, others saw too, so there was widespread interest in preventing the hazard he spoke of. But those in countries without nuclear weapons would never accept a system that stopped the spread of nuclear weapons by creating a permanent nuclear weapons caste system, putting themselves in the lower caste. If the value of these terrible weapons was truly so great as to justify their open-ended possession by some, human equality demands that every nation be free to judge whether to have them too. So, there could be no workable strategy to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, no workable way to prohibit them to some without prohibiting them to all. That is the genesis of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, of 1968, which aims to deal with Kennedy's greatest possible danger and hazard. It's also why the NPT includes Article 6, which says, quote, "Each of the parties to the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control." In 1995, the United Nations General Assembly asked the International Court of Justice to give an advisory opinion on the legality under international law of use or threatened use of nuclear weapons. 14 judges from 14 countries heard the case, including one each from the United States and all 4 other NPT-recognized nuclear weapon states. The ICJ found in part as follows, quote, "There exists an obligation to pursue in good faith and bring to a conclusion negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament in all its aspects under strict and effective international control," close quote. The United States government objects to this finding. The objections largely rest on a selective, close reading of the NPT, combined with relative disregard for the rich body of evidence the court heard about the destructiveness of nuclear weapons, which many states argued can't be reconciled with the law of war. Needless to say, the United States had a full opportunity to make that case to the court, and it did so. American objections now to the ICJ's ruling aren't international, obviously, and aren't law. They are the pleadings of a party to a case that was already heard and lost. They smack of an effort by a losing defendant to appeal his case to higher authority, that authority being the defendant himself. As bizarre and as contrary to any reasonable system of laws as that sounds, in a sense, the United States can get away with doing exactly that. No court, nation, or group of nations will say to the United States, "We will prove to you you're wrong about this by imposing a punishment." In that limited sense, the U.S. position is, quote unquote, right, regardless of the stature of all the authorities who say it's wrong. Nuclear weapons abolition is the only road to security. The law that points us that way is good law. But because nobody can compel America to take that path, we need to choose it ourselves. dropping complex transformation would be a good place to start. Thank you.
The next person to testify will be Professor Emeritus Arnold Kaufman of the Disarmament Committee of Peace Action, Wisconsin.
Thank you, Julie. The move by the current administration to promote, design, and fund a new generation of nuclear armaments is a disastrous step backwards from what has been an increasingly global consensus on the need to prevent new nations from acquiring nuclear arms and to destroy the current stockpiles of nuclear weapons held by the nuclear states. The consistent undermining of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, mainly by the refusal of the United States to aggressively pursue the requirements of Article 6 of that treaty, is only the most blatant example of the way in which the United States continues to undermine the movement toward nuclear abolition. I would like to address an issue which is of utmost importance in the crisis of the proliferation of nuclear armaments, but which is often overlooked. This is the issue of the militarization and weaponization of space. And I would particularly like to call attention to one facet of the space armaments issue, that is the possibility of the designing and deployment of nuclear weapons in space. Although the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 prohibited the deployment of weapons of mass destruction in space and has been observed by its signatories until the present, two developments in the last 2 years have brought into question the continued effectiveness of the Outer Space Treaty. First, in October of 2006, the United States announced a new national space policy, which stated that the United States, quote, will oppose the development of new legal regimes or other restrictions that seek to prohibit or limit United States access to or use of space. Proposed arms control agreements or restrictions must not impair the rights of the United States to conduct research, development, testing, and operations or other activities in space for the United States national interest, end quote. A second development, when seen in conjunction with the new national space policy, is the proposed development of a new generation of nuclear weapons currently under consideration by the Department of Energy, some of which will undoubtedly be designed for use in space. The United States has participated in the United Nations Committee on Disarmament in Geneva since its formation. For the last 20 years, the United States has stood virtually alone, that is usually only with the State of Israel, in opposing new treaties in Geneva aimed to prevent an arms race in space, the so-called Paros treaties, or alternatively, the deployment of all weapons in space. Those treaties have been proposed by China, Russia, and Canada, along with some other members of the Permanent Committee. The conjunction of one, the new national space policy, rejecting any limits on the freedom of the United States to deploy nuclear weapons in space. Two, the proposed development by the Department of Energy of a new generation of nuclear weapons, some of which will presumably be suitable for space deployment. And three, the active rejection by the United States of proposed treaties to ban weapons in space in the major World Forum for Disarmament is an ominous development. Given the catastrophic consequences of continued nuclear development and deployment, I urge the Department of Energy to recommend to the United States Congress the denial of funds for new nuclear weapons development, and to be especially mindful of any proposed nuclear weapons designed to be used in space warfare.